Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a happy Halloween weekend. It is also a spoiler weekend, so it's time yet again for the Eternal Spoiler Breakdown. I'm M, and we're going to be talking about the next 10 or so cards that have come out for Eternal's Cold Front, or not come out, but rather have been spoiled. These are the community spoilers. I believe this is batch 1. We are mostly through batch 1. Obviously, there will be some stragglers, some of which might not have been shown yet, which will probably show up a little bit later today or in the next couple of days. And then there will be a couple more spoiler batches that we will also be reviewing. But nonetheless, there's some exciting cards here and some really interesting things going on. So let's go ahead and talk about them. First things first, we have Bang, Sheriff of Doonhill, a 4-cost 3/3 with a double red influence. It's a Yeti gunslinger, always a good mix. Yetis and guns, just generally always works out in everyone's favor. I don't see why that would be an issue at all. Yeah, Bang is a 3/3 that summons to play a random weapon on Bang and take debt equal to its cost. This is the first we've ever heard the term debt used, but it's assumably the same as contract, or rather contracts imply debt. So we are getting, of course, like debt tokens type setup where basically all power is going to have to be paid into debt until you can actually pay off the cost. So Bang is really, really interesting. It's a pretty powerful card just on account of the fact that they are a 3/3 that just wrecks face if they get a good weapon, but also puts you in debt for the next 1 to 2 turns. And the one thing about Bang that's going to be really, really tricky is that when you play Bang, you aren't going to know whether or not you're going to be taking a significant amount of debt for like an 8-cost weapon, like say the 5/5 that gives you, I think, a dragon every time you hit them, or if you're going to be getting basically no debt at all for, say, a 1/1 weapon with a contract on it. There's definitely like a bunch of different possibilities, and it should be very interesting because the debt is just not optional in this case. You can't contract it, so you don't get the opportunity to play this as just a regular 3/3. You have to potentially sabotage later turns, and it can be as many as 1 or 2 turns depending on how early you are playing Bang Sheriff of Doonhill. So that's pretty interesting. There aren't any like 9 or 10 cost weapons, so you'll never actually lose more than 2 turns to this. But still, this card is probably going to be pretty stat significant. Very likely to come out either as a reasonable mid-range unit or a absolutely absurd drop for its 4-cost slot. I think that either way, you are getting like a ton of value from this card, and then it's going to be a gunslinger, it's going to be a Yeti for tribal purposes, it's going to have weapon synergies because, of course, it plays weapons, and just seems like something that can definitely do a lot of different things all at once. Also, a very fun card to recur, assuming that you have the power to pay for it, and if you're not in constant debt. But really, I mean, who wouldn't want to spend all of their money on weapons for their Yetis? I think this is an amazing card. It's a really good design, and it's clearly super fun. I think it's a really, really awesome one. All right, Cleric Mix. All of these are going to be different sizes, so we'll have to do some resizing every time that we open one up, but that's just the community spoiler way. All right, Cleric Mix. 2 costs, deal 3 damage to an attacking enemy. Contract 2, deal 6 damage to it instead. The flexibility of this card is pretty nice. Like, generally dealing 3 or dealing 6 is definitely an interesting option. The main issue with this is that it's not very stat efficient. I think one of the nice things about some of the contract cards that have been revealed so far is that they are relatively stat efficient. They tend to provide the same value that a normal card of its cost might. And then the debt is an optional sort of kicker that can be really good, but typically won't get it too far over the edge of too powerful. Cleric Mix is, since it is only to an attacking enemy, it's strictly worse than Lightning Bolt. But once you contract 2, then it's strictly worse than the 3 cost that deals 6, I think, to an attacking unit. So yeah, it's pretty tricky. You can definitely pay 2 to kill anything that's big, and that is an important aspect of the card because blue does not typically have very hard removal, and this is some very hard removal for a 2-cost card. Relevantly close to Ice Bolt, except that instead of boosting your opponent's turn, it sabotages your turn. Still, it seems like something that's maybe not going to do everything that you want it to do, and I'm a little bit uncertain as to whether or not it's going to be effective. Overall, I think it's an okay card, but it's probably not an amazing common. Should be really, really strong in draft because removal is pretty important in draft, and even removal that only affects attacking enemies is nice, but very frequently you'll also end up with this card stuck in your hand when your opponent has something that doesn't want to attack, or they can just predict that you have it and not play it. 2 is a lot to pay for a fast spell that's reaction dependent because you have to hold that 2 power up, and your opponent can see that you're holding the power up, and when that happens, they can just ignore it and let you sort of lose the tempo. So tricky stuff overall. Okay, Godan's Mark, another pretty situational card, but with some interesting sort of features on it. The cursed unit's reckless. When the cursed unit dies, create and draw a power burst and a treasure trove. I think it's very strange that the power burst doesn't pay for the treasure trove. So like you have the option of basically like boosting one of your cards out a lot faster, or paying one for the treasure trove and putting two colorless spells into your void, which is actually pretty important because there are a lot of cards that count spells in void, and Godan's Mark is a curse that generates two different spells that you can very easily put into the void. But it still costs you like 3 overall to get the power burst and the treasure trove, so you're just redrawing a card. You're kind of getting all of your value back as long as you play the trove, but you're also paying 4 for that. And then the cursed unit is reckless, so like maybe the cursed unit doesn't die. You can't kill 0 attack units because they won't attack, and you might get something that's a little too big or that gets buffed multiple times, i.e. a green deck with Finest Hour or Saddle Up, and it just never actually goes off when you want it to. You don't get your cards back off of the removal spell. So it's slow, ineffective, and like probably okay in draft, but I would say that this seems like something that in Expedition is not going to be insanely strong, unless there's a lot of value out of putting tons of attachments and spells into your void, because this is a card that generates 3 different cards, and that's important for anything that cares about counting or entomb effects or draw effects. Basically, it just means that you are getting a lot of different extra bonuses that you might not see from this card immediately. Still, you do have to actually get it to trigger the way you want it to, and your opponent has a lot of control over how the unit dies and when the unit dies. So Godan's Mark, not amazing, but it does disable a blocker at 2, and once again sort of contributes to this idea that the new Stone Scar is going to be a very straightforward face-beating, like, go for the reach and deal the damage to the opponent's face. I think that's very likely to be seen in the next couple of ones. All right, Brigade Hall. I knew they were going to be different sizes. All right. Once per turn, he may pay 2 to give a unit +3/+3 and endurance this turn. Summon, play a 3/3 bear. So 4 cost 3/3 bear, not terribly stat efficient, but the pay 2 and give it a unit +3/+3 and endurance this turn is really good. If you can consistently give endurance to a unit, that is just an insanely strong card, particularly in limited. The main thing is that it just means that permafrosts are never a problem. Anything that stuns your units just gets disabled constantly, and Brigade Hall just allows you to basically free a lot of units from a lot of different powerful and scary effects. It also gives your flyers a lot of eventual reach and inevitability. I think it's overall a really strong limited card. Should be a surefire pick in draft. Like, this is a really strong card in draft. So super high tier, I would say, in that particular respect. In Expedition, it's a little bit slower. The bear is still very good, and it is still a relic that also produces another unit, which I'm in love with all these cards that are making lots of extra things. That's really good. But yeah, like paying 2 for +3/+3 in endurance, yeah, it's pretty stat efficient too. Honestly, this seems like a really solid option overall. I would probably play this in Expedition. I probably wouldn't play it in Throne, would be my guess, but I think that it's overall like a pretty interesting option that really gets you some decent tools and the right amount of stats in the right area without being necessarily broken or overpowered in standard formats. So pretty neat stuff. All right, Searing Fist, 2 cost, deal 4 damage to an enemy unit. Very simple, very easy to do stuff with. This is like a detonate, except it targets enemy units, which means that it's just good removal. This card could be reasonably compared to cards like Annihilate and other things like that, where it is just like decent red removal. It's going to hit the majority of the things that you want to hit early on. Obviously, it doesn't kill Sandstorm Titans, which is one of the things that Annihilate and other like 2-cost cards are much more well known for. But this is still like really efficient removal for red, and it allows you to really get rid of a lot of different threats very quickly. 5 health is a problem for red in general, so it would be nice to see some cards that can actually do that. But yeah, this allows you to basically like, it is a slow spell as well. You can't trick with it. You can't use quick draw with it. I think the slow spell aspect of it in particular might relegate it to being more of a draft or limited card, but the amount of damage that it does combined with the like overall potential for cheapish removal in red early could be very good, particularly if you have a lot of 1-cost or 2-cost units that you want to get through for a particular benefit. Regardless, I think it clears the board okay. It's not an amazing card, but it is definitely like decently stat efficient for what it's doing, and the fact that it is restricted to just enemy units is interesting, but it would be pretty crazy on if it could deal players, and it would be really useful if it could do sites. So, all right. Accordion. These are not in any particular order. I probably should have saved this one for last. 1-cost, 1/1. Contract 1, exhaust an enemy unit with a less strength than the wielder. Isn't that delightful? Really, really love it. Okay, so the thing I love most about this weapon is that it's reasonably stat efficient. Like, this is like an ornamental dagger. It's +1/+1. It's probably something that you'd put on an aggro unit to make sure that it survives a trade. And also the exhaustibility is like not very expensive either, so it's something that you would pay 1 for. So this is a stat efficient and really effective aggro card, and it's an accordion. So that means that like I think this card sees play in Expedition. I wouldn't be surprised if it saw play in a little bit of Throne. And like it's just accordion aggro. What? How could you not love this? This is beautiful. Amazing, solid design. I like the fact that it is just a like it's a bludgeoning weapon that you can also use to tire your opponents out and make them not want to fight you. Uh, it's just a good design. I think this one I like even more than Bang in terms of just overall like sheer top-down design. It's super fun and really, really flavorful and just so dumb. I'm very, very happy with this card. All right, next is a big one. Zoe, Conqueror of Stonescar, Flying Revenge, 5/5 for 6. Absurd stats for a Stonescar card. Really, really cool. And then when Zoe hits the enemy player, he deals 5 damage to an enemy unit. So with most flying units, the big deal behind flying units is that you generally need something on the ground to block other stuff and make sure that you aren't getting killed by more efficient units attacking on the ground, because while you are unblockable, your units are generally a little lower on stats. Zoe, on the other hand, is a card that when they attack and deal damage, basically unblockable, they get to wreck anything that could counterattack them back with a additional damage to an enemy unit. Giving this double damage or any sort of like damage boosting ability would be really, really good. But mainly, like, this is just a really, really strong dragon. I would say, like, it's very well statted. The revenge means that it's really, really card efficient and, like, is just going to be a consistent problem for people to deal with. I like the art on it, okay? I think that, like, while the dragon is a little bit interesting, I do like that it's conquering the Stonescar Mountain, and you can see the Grenadin, like, sort of flying in the running away in the background. Very, very good stuff. Yeah, this seems like a really, really powerful card that should see play in a variety of different places. Giving it charge or anything like that is definitely a big benefit. There's a lot of different ways that you can modify this card to give you additional benefits, and you can feel relatively safe in doing that because the card has revenge, so it's going to come back at least once, and then also be primed for all of Stonescar's many, many cards that draw it from the void. All of that means that you're just going to get some like really, really strong stuff happening. I think Zoe is just a really, really good card, and a really flavorful and wonderful rare, even. Not a legendary, but like one of like the more pushed rares that I've seen in the set so far. Super cool, very, very powerful, should be an Expedition staple, and yeah, I think I'd play this in Throne as well. It's really, really neat. All right, Stokes Ambition. 2 cost, transform a non-power card in the player of your choice's hand into a Seek power. So you can mess with your opponent's hand by turning their stuff into Seek powers, or you can fix your own power by basically just playing a really, really expensive Seek power. Let's see here. Actually, no, it costs you 2 cards because you have to play the Seek power and the Stokes Ambition. So you're mostly going to be doing this to your opponent. The fact that you do get a full look at your opponent's hand is very relevant. Just like Exploit, this is a card where basically you're going to be getting a lot of information that's going to be very powerful for you over the course of a game. Eternal games are pretty short, so having a good look at what's in their hand is going to be something that usually ends up being beneficial for most of the round. And also you get to negate one of their biggest cards, although you tend to fix their power for them in the process. So if they are looking for their third power, you might just save them the game, which, yeah, that's a element of it that I'm not super in love with. It's a little bit tricky, and Seek Power is not like a bad card to have in your hand most of the time because it allows you to fix lots of different influence issues, and it also allows you to, of course, get additional power while thinning out your deck, all of which are good things to be doing. So, like, this is definitely not on the power level of Exploit, where Exploit is just, like, way too good and also fixes your power, like, crazy, crazy solid stuff. Using Stokes Ambition on yourself is just not great, and using it on your opponent is maybe something that's okay if you're in, like, a deck that really cares about transformation in some way. Like, it works well with Mind Link, because you get to get your own Seek power, and, like, there's a bunch of... Actually, I'm not sure that it does do that. But yeah, like, I'd have to look at the text of Mind Link. It might be creatures only or something like that. Regardless, this is something that, like, has some interesting applications. I don't think it's insanely strong, but it's an okay sort of discard option in blue, and I'm happy to see discard that isn't quite as powerful as Exploit. I think it's a solid option that at least fixes and makes sure that people can't run crazy combo decks without getting punished from the market or punished from the main. Okay, next up is They All Fall. This is a 4-cost triple shadow. Lovely little bit of art there, I guess. All right, kill an enemy unit. If it has 1 or less, steal it instead. Okay, so this card does some interesting things. I would say that killing things unconditionally is something that you can definitely pay 4 for. That's a Death Strike. You do have to have 3 Shadow Influence for it, which means that it is very much restricted to decks that are either 2 colors and really weighted towards Shadow, or 1 color and very Shadow. Unless symbols are going to be a thing again, this is like a pretty hard card to be playing on for most of the time. The additional option of stealing something that's very, very cheap or has like a low stat line is just a nice little extra bonus, and something that really makes it so that you might run this over a Death Strike, even though Death Strike has like fast, which is I think generally a more important keyword than the ability to steal tiny things. But, you know, you can get like something that's like a 0/5, or even like something that's like just got 1 health but has like a ton of additional, like, or 1 attack but like a ton of additional health. I think it's like okay. Clearly a pretty strong card to be playing in any sort of draft or limited format, since it is unconditional removal with the added ability to steal flyers and other things that are really annoying to you. But like, it's mostly just like an okay expedition option in Shadow for and in Throne you're just glutted with options. You probably aren't going to run this. Still, stealing things is fun. That's a nice little touchstone. So if this is the Death Strike of the current format, that's going to make the format a little bit more fun to play, which is exactly what we're looking for. Trick Throw. 1 cost, deal 2 damage. That's already reasonably stat efficient damage for blue. You get to kill a lot of different units with this very quickly. It isn't a fast spell, so that's a little bit unfortunate, but you still get to transform a card in your hand into a snowball. I would say this works best with a lot of like Echo and other stuff, where you basically are drawing cards to draw cards, like Jotun Hurler. You can Jotun Hurler, Trick Throw, turn the Jotun Hurler into a snowball, and get a snowball from the Jotun Hurler, which is adorable. I think that's like really fun. Clearly this card works really well with spell damage cards, which of course Skycrag is going to be pretty happy to find, because it creates 2 different damaging cards, and the main issue I have generally found with Skycrag decks is not having enough damage in those decks. Like, you just don't have enough damaging spells, and so something that is a pretty efficient damaging spell, and B gives you another pretty efficient damaging spell is pretty neat. You do have to transform a card in your own hand though, and that's not always something you're going to want to do, so regardless, the card usually ends up being 1-for-1 removal against aggro decks, and should be okay most of the time. And it damages sites, and it gives you snowballs to damage more sites. It's a really good anti-site tool in that respect, because you can pay 2 to deal 3 damage to a site, and that is not something that is always easy to do in Primal, or in most colors, in fact. So, seems pretty solid. I'd be mostly okay with playing this in any blue deck. I think it's a reasonable option, and should be at least Expedition viable, if not even better than that. Okay, we'll save Rhombus for last, because Volunteer Corps would be a bit of a disappointment to run to. Oh, what just happened here? Hello. Hi, we're dancing around. Okay, Volunteer Corps. Contract 2. Draw a sigil of your choice from your deck. Ultimate, pay 6 to give Volunteer Corps flying and +1 strength for each type of influence you have. So at the most, this card can be an 8-cost 5/2 flyer, a Valkyrie and colorless, and also draw a sigil of your choice from your deck for a contract. The contract on this card is actually pretty good. If it were on a unit that had any sort of additional offensive stats, then I would say it would be very strong. But in this case, the Volunteer Corps is very, very likely to be a dead card on the ground and not terribly likely to turn into a strong card in the air. You really need to have multiple different colors for this card to be even remotely close to stat efficient, and like paying the ultimate is just like something, man, I almost wish that you could do that as a contract, because it just seems like you're really not getting a lot of value for the cost that you are paying. It does fix your power, and it is a flyer, so limited might look at this card, particularly for 5-color decks if 5-color becomes a viable format. I think you need some really, really specific things for this to happen, but it could. Regardless, I would say this is overall a pretty underpowered card. The fixing for it is nice, and like I would definitely pay Contract 2 to draw a Sigil, because I think that like fixing is just really, really good in limited formats. But like I just don't know about that stat line, and I just don't know about that ultimate. Neither of those seem like especially strong. Even if you have all 5 colors, I think the payoff is a little bit too weak. The payoff is not too weak on our last card of the spoiler breakdown, Rhombus Single Swing. And this is a 6-cost, double red, double yellow, 8/8, that gives endurance, or has endurance, and when it kills a unit with 2 strength or less, draw a card. Alright, so my immediate thought on this is that Praxis right now uses Open Way Supplier, a 1/1 card that gives things killer. And it's very, very likely that if you are playing a bunch of those and a bunch of Rhombas, you're probably going to eventually hit one of those and get a Rhomba with Killer, which is an 8/8 Killer Endurance that immediately draws you a card for eating something small that your opponent has. I think that's pretty just ridiculous. Otherwise, the 8/8's ability generally is something along the lines of like, this card is very, very hard to block effectively because A, it trades really, really well with everything, including big units, and B, if you try to block it with a bunch of little units, then I'm going to get a bunch of cards and replace Rhomba with another Rhomba, and Rhomba is already a really stat-efficient unit. For an 8/8 giant, I would say, like, yeah, 6 cost is really, really good. This card has like Sandstorm Titan level stats where it is just super pushed. It has endurance, it has more stats than it should for a 6 cost, and it has a reasonably relevant ability. The high influence cost is something that restricts it mostly to Praxis, which I think is definitely reasonable considering the card is doing entirely Praxis things, being a very slow and difficult unit that is just going to slowly wear your opponent down by making sure that every time that they try to chump block it, you get to draw cards. I don't know. This card's got a ton of power, a ton of reach, and like very, very frequently your opponent won't want to block it, and when your opponent does block it, you go up in card advantage really, really frequently. An 8 damage hit is nothing to scoff at, but like this card just can't be chumped effectively by anything that's running small units, so overall, I'm pretty excited about this card in general. Like, there's a lot of different ways that this card can be powerful. I think it is stat efficient enough to even play in Throne, and I think in Expedition, like, this is a card that's just going to be absolutely bonkers Praxis nonsense that you can play to really stabilize a board, and the fact that it has Endurance means that it blocks really well on top of that. You're going to be looking to not only play this, but to protect it and to buff it and make it into something that is just, like, way, way better than that. And I think that's just great. This is a really, really solid card. I'm not sure if it's on the like broken side. I would say that like 6 cost 8/8 is definitely a really, really good card, but this is still very vulnerable to removal and still doesn't have any like a special survivability things going on. It is just hard to chump and very, very good at trading, and I think that that is strong enough that the card is just going to be like a really, really big staple without being overpowered or unbalanced. And yeah, it's kind of right where you want it. It's also like a really, really nice tribute to Ramba, who is rapidly becoming one of my favorite characters for, not for like, lore reasons or anything like that, but just because all of the cards that he releases seem to be like super awesome designs. So like every time we see a Ramba, it just seems to be a cool, cool card. Looking forward to the third one, I guess, because this is just like excellent, and I'm very, very into it. Yeah, beyond that, like I think that this is just like a good crazy option. I have a hard time not calling it single swinger because that just kind of sort of seems like where it's going. But yeah, it's a really, really solid option, and super super cool. I think this is a very very good card, and this is a pretty good one for a capstone. Between this and the Stonescar Voprex, it looks like everyone in this format is going to be getting at least one really efficient and really effective hero in their chosen colors. So like I'm guessing we're going to be seeing the standard some of the standard factions coming back. I mean, obviously we are. We've got Praxis and Stonescar back. So like gonna be really exciting to see if this is like a cycle of 5 or a cycle of 10. Regardless, really really cool heroes, and should be really solid if we ever do a Heroes Rise format, and should be really solid for Hero Matters. Very very interested in that. All right, that's it for today's spoiler breakdown. You can catch me live on Twitch TV/LocoPojo. We should be streaming again on Saturday. And we might be doing Eternal. We might be doing a number of different things. I'm very excited about all the different possibilities. I will probably be grinding out the sealed in Eternal, though. That seems very likely. Okay. Beyond that, I am on YouTube here at LocoPojo, and I have an alternate channel for Arkham stuff called M Plays, which you can check out in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!